technologies like lidar and photogrammetry. Notable projects include his work on the Sannati archaeological site and the aerial photogrammetric documentation of temples across several states. His contributions have earned him prestigious awards and research grants from organizations like the ASI. Dr. Rao has published widely on topics related to ancient Indian architecture and has presented his research at international conferences and seminars. Throughout his career, he has held key academic positions, including professorships at Manipal Institute of Technology, showcasing his commitment to education and the preservation of India's architectural heritage. I also welcome our speakers, Sukriti Gupta, Ishita Shah, and Manya Saran R. I now invite all the speakers to proceed on the dais. Finally commence, I kindly request our speakers to please restrict their presentation to a time period of 15 minutes. At 12 minutes, you will hear the sound of the buzzer as a gentle reminder and the final buzzer at 15 minutes. I now invite our first speaker, Architect Sukriti Gupta, Consultant Ministry of Finance, who will be presenting on the topic Cities for Culture, Rethinking Sustainable Development in Cities with Culture at its core. A conservation architect by profession, Sukriti Gupta has been working in sector of cultural heritage protection and its propagation under various capacities. She has been closely associated with building level as well as urban conservation and tourism projects in India. She understands the potential of the sector, advocates its importance, and is keen to develop it holistically with the people of all disciplines who work together. She is also a trainer and works with institutions like INTAC, WIR UNESCO Center, and other agencies for training personnel from academic institutions, government departments, communities, as well as students. Her current role with MOF revolves around bridging the gap in the CSR ecosystem of CPSCs. She advocates and urges them to see beyond the build by helping them understand various facets of cultural heritage protection, its management, and multiple dimensions of the sector which requires equal attention. I now invite Sukriti Gupta on the dais for her presentation.
Hello, hi. Very good afternoon after a very lavish lunch, and I hope that you don't sleep through it, which usually is the case after the presentations that happen, after the lunch. So yeah, and I think the topic is quite interesting. It's related to culture, heritage, and I hope that you might enjoy it. Also, I'm a very bad presenter. I will interact a lot, so you might have to be a little particular when I will prompt you for responses. So bear with me. Yeah? Alright. So, since we'll be talking about culture, and there'll be a long list of other people speaking on different facets of culture, I hope that I set the tone straight and talk about the different aspects of it. Right? What is culture? Just tell me, there's this montage of pictures that you'll see. Tell me if you relate it with the terms of culture and heritage. Do you think this is culture? This represents culture? What about this? Yeah? What about this? This? Very usual, right? This? Do you know what that is? Seems like one of the performative arts. It's called Astan Goi. So yeah, part of culture, the broad, big umbrella of culture. This? Natural heritage. नाम सुना होगा कभी कहीं right? So this forms an integral part of natural heritage. It's one of the tea states of Assam, right? What about this? What is that? It's toy terrain, right? Again, it is part of the movable heritage, right? This? Yeah? Alright. What about these things then? Customs, right? Yeah. Yeah. So you see how there is so much more to culture and heritage than we think them to be. It can be broadly categorized into different sections of art, food, languages, build something that is tangible and readily acknowledged as part of culture and heritage. But there is much more than that in the form of traditions, the knowledge systems, the practices, the religion, the attire, the way we talk, right? The core values of the different societies. India being so rich and diverse, for that matter, has a lot to offer in that sense, right? So yeah, since I'll be speaking on the subject of culture being as a tool for bringing about sustainable development. Bada hai sustainable development kya hai? What is sustainable development, or the idea of sustainability for that matter? Sustainability is the ability to exist consistently, right? Irrespective of the barriers of time, conditions, it is a condition, right? What is sustainable development? As per the set definition of the UN, it is a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future, right? Sustainability is usually the long-term goal, and sustainable development are the tools and the techniques by which you'll be able to achieve that state of being. Got it? So these are the basic 17 sustainable development goals. You'll realize the point of me discussing all these things in a while, maybe in a minute or two. Since we are talking about SDGs, there are certain sections or the certain goals which exclusively and explicitly talk about the role of culture in making all those goals achievable. So there are these certain points that I will urge you to go through to get a better understanding of what I'm saying, because I've just glanced through it. Now, in order for us to be able to mark a society or a nation as sustainably developed, there are usually there are these three pillars that categorize a nation to be a sustainably developed nation. The three pillars, named as the social pillar, the economic pillar, and the environmental pillar. What if I were to say, since I am a person advocating culture and heritage, and I know how as experts, I'm sure all of us will agree how viable and easy this whole idea of urban development and this whole idea of sustainable development will be so easy. If at all culture is the one who probably propagates it furthermore or acts as a binder between all of these things. Culture is something that comes to us very naturally, right? Or all these concepts, sorry to say, I'll be very honest, all these concepts of sustainable development, these are very westernized notions of it, right? We as a culture, for that matter, so many other cultures have been following sustainable practices for long. Something as simple as you reusing that. something that comes very natural to us. Something as simple as passing down that denim t-shirt generation to generation. पहले बड़े भाई बहन पहनते हैं, फिर छोटा dog, right? And it's something that we've been doing since ages. Or if we were to look at it in professional terms, exclusively with respect to culture and heritage, we have this concept of Jeevnodharan, where the temples, if we were to talk about Hindu religion specifically, where there is this concept of annually maintaining that whole precinct or temple by this practice of Jeevnodharan, or something as simple as cleaning our households during Diwali, getting that fresh paint. What is that? It's a very simple way of managing, right? And all these things have been there. It's just that it's highlighting that we need to connect people back to their roots. And when we talk about development, what if I said that culture can be a tool for bringing about that ideal development that you all speak about? So I'm here to present you with that idea, and we have culture as the basis for these 3 pillars of development, as the 4th pillar of sustainable development. In order to create a culturally sensitive urban development model, it is high time that we realize the importance of the cultural practices and the values, and utilize them for our benefit, for the development that we want to happen. Right? There can be 2 modes to it, where culture is as equal a part of the whole system, or maybe as a tool or the central piece where it connects all of these 3 pillars. With this idea, there was, I'm sure you'll probably go back and learn about it. Please do. There was this Agenda 21 for Culture that happened to come out way back in 1992, where they explicitly recognized the importance of culture in bringing about all of that. And it was the first document, and eventually so and so forth. There were so many other conferences that kept happening up until 2015, where they very ironically forgot about culture. And it was just exclusively in the 11th goal of sustainable cities and communities that they speak about culture, that too in a very small portion. So whatever everyone is doing, it's their business. But when we talk about development, you might have heard so many academicians, so many people talking about that approach to be very context specific. There is always a parity when it comes to bringing ideas to life, or when it comes to implementing a lot of these policies, so to say, on ground, right? So the ideal way should never be from top to bottom, rather it should be from bottom to top, right? So in that sense, what we did was, I'll skip all this, doesn't really matter. We came up with a project called Cities for Culture, where we understood how you have seen it all around you, how culture changes from city to city, region or nation to region specific, state specific, it becomes very different, right? So cities being the core of the culture or the hub of culture, it's very essential if you were to bring about any sort of development in any city. It is first to understand the culture of that city and to analyze the question of culture. Culture की जब बात करते हैं ना, लोग हवा में उड़ा देते हैं कि statistically analyze करना तो possible नहीं है. It's not that. It is very much possible, right? And there are certain parameters to it. Why I chose this particular case to be presented is so that we all work in silos. You as students, academicians, and institutes in silos. What if, and no one really will come to you with their projects. You'll have to understand the city, take out the projects. Once we are done with this presentation, you'll understand how it is so easy for you as people who are part of the whole thing. It's easier for you to understand and take these projects to the authorities, right? Take it in your hands. So there are certain parameters by which you can easily analyze the cultural question of the city. which can be cultural rights related to the diversity, creativity of the city, education, environment, economy, equality and social inclusion, urban planning and public spaces, information and knowledge, and of course, last but not the least, and very important, governance of culture. Kitni bhi baat karte rahe, if at all, it doesn't get applied, it is of no use, right? So, this was a model thing that we did, Bhopal being the pilot city for it. Eventually, many cities took it up and they were able to assess their city accordingly. So yeah, with respect to cultural rights, there were certain action points that were well defined. कि हम किसी city में cultural, do we know about the importance of rights? Do you know the 6 basic fundamental rights? Okay, look it up. Cultural rights are one of the 6 basic fundamental rights, and no one really bothers to talk about it. So it's high time that we understand them. And how do you analyze it? Uski certain action points हैं with respect to which understand कि उसके respect में कुछ काम हुआ है या नहीं. Okay. I'm a firm believer of culture and heritage being of the people, for the people, and by the people, just like our constitution. It's something that is constantly changing, constantly evolving, made by us, for us, right? So they are as much as part of us, and cultural rights become more important in that sense. So are there any possibility of universal access systems when it comes to cultural rights? Is there any active participation in decision making? Are there any guidelines on the rights and responsibilities? कहीं कुछ वजूद है इस चीज़ का? So if you were to assess it, just go through. There's so many informations available otherwise online. There are departments working for it. Just see if at all they are working or not with respect to that. And if they're not, then you have to bring it to their attention. In terms of diversity and creativity, if there are any spaces for different facilities, there are different venues which support art and culture in different forms. Use of local cultural products. Then with respect to culture and education, first of all, is there any identification of the local cultural values? Is there any awareness? What is the level of awareness to the people? If at all there is less, then what can be done for that? Is there any local platform or online portal? We are living in the age of internet. You might have seen this, instant change that happened once COVID hit. Everything came online, and surprisingly, you might have seen yourself getting back to culture in some form or the other, because people started painting, people started singing, people started dancing. So it did provide a big sense of refuge in that sense. So if at all, is there possibility of that? And if at all there are platforms, what are they exactly doing? Right? And there is a way of doing things just for the sake of it. There is a way of doing things genuinely. So if at all they are doing genuinely, get well involved. Okay, alright. Culture and environment for that matter, are there any key policies with respect to environment and culture? Are there any practices? There are so many practices related to environment protection. Something as simple as nature worship or creature worship, सांप आता है, दूध पिलाते हैं, so that it's just all these things are very much inbuilt, right? So are there any such practices, and are they being recognized? Are there any programs to preserve such things? Culture and economy, now they both are an integral part. You might have seen such big broad ecosystems. किसी भी religious place के बाहर जाओ, you'll see this small little economy being supported by it. So you might have seen authorities removing people or these small little businesses because they are an encroachment. So if at all they are being removed, are they being supported elsewhere? Right? So many of these things which need to be understood. Equality and social inclusion. Now culture is something, I am a firm believer, again, for culture is for all. A person an elderly person, a small person, a person with special ability, they should actually able to enjoy and access culture? क्या हमारे शहरों में ऐसे provisions हैं? कभी देखा है किसी cultural site पे ramps लगा देते हैं सिर्फ और सिर्फ accessible बनाने के लिए ramps लगा दिए. That's pretty much about it. What else? There can be in numerous ways. So much to do, right? With respect to planning in public spaces, I need not explain it to you. You are very well versed with that. Information and knowledge, access to free and plural information. Right to information is again one of the basic human rights. So many of them are there. I'm not really touching it. Eventually, governance of culture, सब कुछ waste है अगर वो practice में नहीं आता, right? And of course, the authorities will never come to you. So as students or as faculties or academicians, you have to take all these researches and they rely heavily on you for that. Now being part of the system of the government, I know how they lack this thing and how they want people to come up to them. There are so many of them that want to do good work. So yeah, so that is what we did with respect to the city of Bhopal, understood each and every commitment, heavily did research work, secondary resources, just done. Yeah. You have to identify different stakeholder departments or organizations who are actively participating. If not, you have to make them aware. Right? You have to take hold of the city that you live in. Right? Then identification, different ways to gather information, right? Prashnavali, questionnaires बनाए, and वो हर city के साथ change होंगे, regional languages में आएंगे. And interestingly, we sort of put it against our radar. We sort of put it against where we wanted to see how is an Indian city performing in terms of the global average, and it was quite good in that sense. So. It's just that we have this capability which we are completely unaware of, and we need to work towards it, and it is us who are the sole in charge of it. And all these projects, where do they eventually, I'll just wrap it up with this, how does this help doing all these exercises? Matlab kya hai? You identify the people who have to do and who are doing, and who are not doing, you make them aware. Accessible to what? Accessibility is a big feature. Framework, lots of frameworks that might come up. Recognition of cultural heritage, लोग seriously नहीं लेते, बिल्कुल नहीं लेते. So yeah, it's high time that it is exclusively given this. And interestingly, one major point, we don't have policy, we don't have a cultural policy. You know that? Yes, we don't have a cultural policy, given the fact that we are very diverse. It is always subjected to that. There are of course pros and cons to it, but if at all, एक policy level पे चीज़ आएगी, so there will be different provisions to it, proper framework बनेगा. So this is what we did, and eventually, subsequently, 2021 के बाद, ICOMOS being one of the major players in heritage and conservation came up with this whole idea of tribal and the program that we were working was in 2018, and they came out with different thematic indicators as well. So yeah, it's my urge, given the platform and you being the carriers and patrons of it maybe in the future, it's my urge to you to take this very seriously and look around you. You will not be, you will like it. So yeah, alright, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sukriti. That was quite insightful. We'll further continue this in our panel discussion. Well, our next presenter is Manya Rasan R, Associate Professor, K School of Architecture, Rizvi, and I invite him to present on his topic, which is documenting decorative press paper ceiling, the Dar Hall at Osmania British Residency, Hyderabad. Manya Rasan R, architect, academic, and photographer, specializes in documenting built heritage. He is an associate professor at K School of Architecture, teaching design and history. He works on projects related to aerial mapping, photogrammetry, and technical imaging in architecture and conservation practice. He graduated in PR from SPA Delhi and post-graduation in photography design from NIT Ahmedabad and UCA Farnham, UK. An alumni of the Leon Levy Foundation Center for Conservation and a tutor of it now. Manya Rasan works with various government and private organizations and conducts capacity building workshops in heritage documentation with various institutions including CEPT, NIT and INTAP. As a research scholar, architectural documentation is his primary area of research. I invite Maniyarasan R on the stage to commence his presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. So, good afternoon everyone. First I'd like to thank Rizvi for this wonderful conference, and I also thank, I can't thank enough to be able to present along with Dr. Kailash Rao for the first time, and I take it as my honor, sir. Thank you so much for the amount of work that he has done. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be there on dais with him. So, the presentation, what I'm going to talk about is going to take a particular project, but overall it's going to look at imaging and its impact on cultural heritage, where I'm looking at image as not just as photographs to be put as before or after, but as asserts to the cultural heritage property. So, quickly jumping onto it, just to give a brief introduction of this building. It was formerly called as British Residency, and currently it's part of Osmania University for Women in Hyderabad, Koti area. The proposals had started as early as 2008 or 9, and then finally last year, January, it was handed over to the university. It took really 14-15 years of conservation in different phases, and I had the opportunity to document right from 2014 till 2023 till its completion. And it was partnered by the World Monument Fund and the Department of Heritage in Telangana. So to give a brief thing, so I'm not going to talk about the entire building. I'm going to talk about the various times or the junctions where imaging became a participant to the restoration process in this particular Darbar Hall, which is one of the most important space in the residency. So this was an image, as you might, if you go today, you would see this particular image where it's a shot taken from down looking up. And to give a brief understanding, so the part which is in the center is the part of the Darbar Hall, where the front elevation is behind it, so it's a section cut across. This is the overall, the main building of British Residency, as of now it stands there. So, when I'm talking about imaging as an aspect for the cultural heritage, because I would like to kind of differentiate between them, not just as one thing as imaging, but as different aspects, providing different information, enabling different stakeholders to do different things at different points of time. Overall, putting it together can become an archive. So when we talk about imaging, I'm going to technically split them all, right from starting as an architectural photography points and basic site documentation, panoramas, parallel photography, wide-angle shots, video documentaries, because these are many different techniques. As photographer or as an architect or as a conservator, we try to capture the assets at every different points of time, depending upon our understanding that what might work. So in this, within all of it, I would like to split them into two, where we say imaging for posterity and imaging for practice. When I call for practice, I'm talking about the conservation practice. Because this is the building which evolved me, or rather pushed me, progressed me into photogrammetry. If I can simply say, I entered in this building, I was awed by this building. I entered in this building as an architectural photographer. I came out as a conservation documentation, photogrammetry guy, and all those things that kind of happened. So these are kind of the initial set of images that I used to take. I used to wait till the evening, take some nice cool sky shots with some birds fluttering up here and there, and basic documentation, and all those things happened. Slowly I realized these images doesn't have any value other than going on the front page of a report. It's not even going inside the second page of it. And then I realized oh, isn't it useless to do beautiful images? Then that is a point where started looking and reading about images that can be objective, but clearly informing what are we trying to say. So when we're calling it, so what we are doing is we all are creating a lot of visual data, trying to provide compelling site information. I think the word compelling is the most important tag here, because we end up taking 1,000 images in a month, and how many images that we even revisit is a question that we need to answer. When data converts to information, then the information gets converted into knowledge. Then the knowledge has to become an archive that is retrievable. What we do now could be great, but after 5 years or 50 years, if someone is not able to look into what we have done, then again it's useless. So these are some of the basic images that were found during, and then these images, we'd like sit and talk for weeks and weeks, like what is there and what is not there, because that's the only thing that is available with us. So overall, it became a point where the availability, accessibility, and the authenticity of the images were taught, and all we had was 3 or 4 images, and that went on for 4 or 5 weeks. So what am I trying to say, or what is my propaganda, or rather the purpose is to say that imaging is a participant tool and can be a participant tool. Earlier, at least there was a question that who all had cameras. Now there is no question, everyone has a camera. And then once we have a good image, it is allowing us to make informed decisions, that is allowing us to intervene, that is allowing us to manage things. One good image is going to solve a lot of problems for us. And overall, again, to look at photo not as a product, but as a process and the progress-oriented outcomes that can generate discussions and dialogues over completion of the projects. Many problems that kind of like stop us from here, and some of them are obviously the time, the resources, which also comes with skill set, inappropriate equipments. We still don't know what's a good camera. We always have this question. Technology is, again, we always keep technology a little away. There are a lot of presumptions with that. Technology is something that we are expected to go along with, to not push them out, embrace them and then take them in. And also looking at that, it is no more a practice, it is not yet a practice, it is continuously becoming an optional thing. Documentation would be the first thing that would go out of the budget if there is no budget. Whereas the European countries and the American countries, where the laser scan data has become a part of the ecosystem. Now the problem is, even as an institution, if I end up doing laser scanning, but is it possible for an early career professional? Is it possible for a small firm? So that is one point where I would like to touch the photogrammetry as a primary dominant tool for early career professionals, smaller firms, and for someone who can just go and get data without expecting anyone. So to introduce the site, so this is it's a 2-floor site. It's a Darbar Hall. This was an image taken during the restoration. The ceiling is made of papier mesh. It's decorative pressed paper ceiling that were imported from UK. 650 panels were brought in, and they were nailed in the 18th century when they were built. And this was a time when the restoration was about to start, and I was informed that we need to document before the restoration starts. So I just started shooting photographs, and when I say documenting, they were simple, good photographs with tripod, color corrected, wide angle shots, panoramic shots, some close-up shots with the telephoto lenses. So these are some panoramic shots from both corners of it, and then you can also see the livid problems that these images carry along with. It does allow us to give us an information, but then it does not give us reliable information. It can give you a referable information. And this was one wide angle shot taken off the existing, or rather before restoration that happened, that we had shot. You could see a lot of panels that have been damaged, a lot of things that require repair, and a lot of things are completely irreparable. And also, there was another discussion on the color of the panels. What is the original color over there? And instantly, that was the same time the court was talking about what is the original color of Taj Mahal. I don't think there was any resolution that has come to us, because we don't have archives, or because the photography didn't exist when the Taj Mahal was constructed. So, started taking different kinds of shots, trying to kind of like quench my thirst of doing like how else can I kind of do it. Then I realized it's a flat surface. Why can't I do like close-up shots and then stitch cleanly and then print like huge method and then kind of give it to the art conservator's team. So, and then that was first time I decided, let me document myself documenting the thing. So, put a time lapse, went on shooting around like 30-40 shots of it with a 100mm lens. And what I got was this. It looked good for me, but when I sent it to the art conservators, it wasn't good. When I go closer, then there is a lot of things that are not matching. In spite, theoretically it should work, because it's a flat surface, there is no three-dimensional information over there, but it still didn't work. Then this was the time I was introduced to photogrammetry. One of the art conservators, Sri Kumar Menon, said like, oh, if you have done it so perfectly, give those photos. And he dropped them back into use of MetaShape, the photogrammetry software, which I even use it now. And that was my moment where things started change. My entire way of looking things, looking at orthographics, because orthographics is one thing we always keen on looking at every building. And this is the point where I realized I have a place in the conservation team. I am part of the practice to a point where I am the first person who will be called for any of this particular, the Heritage Matters conservation firm, who is also the consultant for this project. Every project, first call after the proposals confirmed is for me, and that is a level I was able to provide. And that again, I will go back to that another word, the compelling visual information, that it is able to make us make decisions, make interventions, make part of the practice, and then that's kind of like going all through it. So, and then this was the final image that we got now after photogrammetry processing, where we have everything clean, in place, scaled, measurable, and everything can be done. And most of the art conservators were not on the site. It was this image is what they were working with. Every panel was numbered, how many panels were repairable, how many panels were to be refixed, how many panels had to be cleaned. All of it happened with image. And that is another time where I had the opportunity to do an art conservation course, where imaging is an integral part of their conservation course. Everyone has to know photogrammetry, everyone has to use Illustrator. There was no cap for them, no. But everything, assessment, all the things happening over there. So once that is done, the restoration started, I continued documenting. This is up in the scaffolding, where the interventions and investigations were going on. I was documenting throughout, and they literally, it was almost like a 1.5 year, 2 year project. They literally went inch by inch by inch and then processed it. I also documented just that part where it was restored in the ceiling. This was also my guinea pig, where I was doing as much as experimentation and exploration as possible. So this was like the image. If you can see how many of the panels are gone, so final graphic output, to a point where there is no one who can do a papier mesh ceiling now. No one can do a decorative papier mesh now. Now what do we do for the ones that is not repairable?
So 3 more.
Not repairable. So there is a point where after a lot of discussion we decided to shoot one of the original panels as it is, and the one that is up is a print, an archival canvas print that is put up there. There are 12 panels which for a normal common layman would not know, but 20 years later, if it has to be restored, can be easily pulled out and replaced. So that was a 1:1 scale image. So again, imaging came into place. And after all the conservation happened, I documented it all over again. So now I have the information from 2020 after restoration, all archived in place with metadata, all of it information there for them, for the Heritage Matters and the World Heritage Monument. These were some images taken after restoration. So overall, it is the need of understanding the imagery, understanding it as a medium, understanding it as a process that is continuous, not as a product-oriented thing. To a point where also made some little funny jigsaw puzzles for the conservators who worked on it, and to see whether they able to actually fit it together. So now the presentation is over. A few glossary stuff which I want to say, because we did throw a lot of things out there. Photography, you all know, it is efficient, it is gives us evidence, it's analysis. It is also available now and affordable now with most of us. Obviously, we can push a little whenever we have budgets, but with your good 4 cameras, you can make decent amount of information coming out of it. Now, what is photogrammetry? It is just a technique where you can make a 3D model or measurable imagery with sequential images. Now, these are some of the points where in various different methods try to document as a process. So this was part of the World Heritage Monument dossier for Hoysalas, where we did the documentation with photogrammetry and created the drawings. And if it is all stitched photograph, then what is panorama? What is the difference between photogrammetry and panorama? Panorama is taken from one point. Photogrammetry is taken by moving yourself across the surface that you are documenting. Now, this is also panorama. Now, that panorama is not really usable, but this panorama is something where you have a telephoto lens, move ahead. If you have space, you are able to give a clean image. Now, this is another panorama taken of 24 images. Almost orthographics is completely removed. This is again Somnathpura, taken in a 400 mm lens. And that's the level of detail that you can get. Now, what is the difference? Photogrammetry or photography? Photography is filled with optical errors, and photogrammetry is orthographic. If you remember your first year, you were given a cube and asked to convert that. That is what photogrammetry does from photography. Just to finish with one last example, this is a building of this is one wide-angle image of GHMC building in Hyderabad. This is the same image, optical corrected. Now, what do we mean by optical correction? The vanishing point is being pushed up. That is optical correction, and that is orthographics. Now, when we talk about orthographic, there are no vanishing points. It's a parallel image. Now, this is a parallel image, an orthographic image, this is photogrammetry. Around 150 to 200 images taken, and you can see the difference between, specifically on the roof part. Now, developing a recording practice that considers imaging as a normalized activity that is part of the practice or the process and not just as product, producing compelling visual data, captured thoroughly, processed, saved, archived, and can be retrieved with ease, possibly with the best practices manual, which also we lack for future. That's it.
Thank you, sir. It was a very interesting study and lessons from the site itself. Now, as a chairperson, Dr. Kailash Rao has to leave because of prior commitment. So, I request the chairperson to please present his concluding thoughts.
Thank you, Usman. Thank you, Mani and Supriti. Well, it's quite two distinct areas when what Supriti spoke and what Mani spoke. Of course, when Supriti told about what is culture, what produces culture, I think one of the definitions that I heard about culture is that anything which is not natural is a culture. Trees grows in the forest, they are just trees. If you plant the tree and grow them, it becomes horticulture. Right? So you create a certain kind of an environment to sustain certain things and nurture them, it becomes a culture. And what produces a culture? Culture is not a static entity. It evolves, it keeps changing. So a product between a place, time and people produces a culture. These three elements. Today, at this particular time of age, when this group of students and faculty sitting there produce a culture which is unique to this time. Perhaps maybe when Britishers were developing this area during certain kind of a time at 17th century, 18th century, an interaction with the local community and produces that particular entity is a culture. Culture might have a material component which is called as a material culture and certain things which are all living cultures. So culture not to be seen as a static entity but as a sort of a continuously ever changing, ever evolving kind of. Then I think the other question comes into okay, if it's ever evolving, why do you need to conserve it? Some elements some facets of your thing will stand out, becomes timeless. Perhaps there is a certain kind of value that adds to that particular place. That needs to be re-looked into it. In the morning that I told you, anything which has taken a long time to evolve, don't let it go that easily. Because there's a meaning, there's a purpose, there's a whole way it has evolved, so certain kind of a thing which is required. So when Sukriti was talking about what is culture, what is, what makes it, I think somewhere we need to look at these aspects of it and certain kind of a definition that we need to have to work with. And maybe the definition can change as culture changes, as time changes. But then certain kind of things that which are timeless, meant to be. And then as a professionals in the field of cultural heritage or studies, need to identify them. First is to identify them. Everything what is there, does it needs to be conserved? May not be, maybe, we don't know. Yeah. So, but you need to identify what is that, which makes sense over a period of time. And then perhaps maybe kind of a certain kind of anything in an isolation will not become a culture. As I told you, it's a product of 3-4 things. And then similarly, whether it becomes a part of your eco-culture, whether it is your, historic culture, whether it's so all these kind of things you interface with those 2-3 things which are important, like various things. For example, when she was talking about cultural economy, it doesn't really stick to only the few shops which are selling flowers outside a temple or a mosque or whatever it is. It's a part of a larger system where they sustain the entire city. Sometimes it's made much beyond that. Manyasan, where he's teaching in places like Tamil Nadu, the whole concept of a city, everything is embodied into larger this kind of cultural aspects of it, where it's very difficult to distinguish. This is where economy ends and this is where culture begins, and this is where geography ends and this is where culture becomes. They are all part of it. I think somewhere as if we really can see this holistic perspective, maybe we can do things much better. And I'm very glad to see Maniyarsan's work. Many times, one question whenever we present something, a beautiful drawing, then the immediate question there, people ask them, is it available? Have you published it? Is it available? Now, what Maniyarsan has shown is very simple thing. Documentation is not a product which freezes. Okay, it may become an archival at a certain point of time when it reaches, but it's a continuous process. Documentation tool to understand. It is not a tool to preserve or freeze. Perhaps whenever you usual question somebody says that okay, somebody has done a documentation and I have something base to work upon. No, we don't trust any of the other documentations. What we have done, the documentation is valid at that point of time for that particular building and only for that phase. Next time when you go, you use your tools to again re-understand it. It is not a, rightly said that it's not a pretty picture that you take it. When you come out of this, pretty picture approach to, a recording approach, you will have a different perspective altogether. Because conservation is not some sort of a project. It's a kind of, again, it's a continuous process where it is a tool for you to re-look at it, re-understand yourself or recalibrate yourself. So I'm sure the kind of work that Maniyarsan has been doing is quite inspiring to the students and various other heritage professionals. And also what he clearly told is very simple. I think one of the questions that he asked is, many people ask, which is a good camera which is a good camera? My answer is that the one which right now we have is the best camera. Whatever that you are using is the best right now, because what it can, what he has shown very clearly that what you cannot do it with one image, you can do it with 10 images, because you have a combined effect of 10 images with the various tools that he has shown. And in fact, I'm very glad in the initial stages of it when I tried to produce orthographic images. In fact, I did the almost 8.5 kilometer stretches of Varanasi with a very, using 3 drones and whatnot, a lot of circus we did it. And in the end, I produced a long, orthography of around a kilometer stretch. When I submitted it to the authorities, they were not able to distinguish. It's an image, what photograph. Anybody can do it. What do you do with it? I said that when I cut, they were all so used to getting it rasterized and getting drawings. Then I told that the moment this image gets transformed into a drawing, there is a huge data loss. In this, it's a realistic elevation, so realistic that it looks like a photograph for you. It has the information of the color, texture, it has the information of deterioration, cracks, the different paints which are being done, the patches, everything. So it is a lot more informative. If you want to measure it, there's a, this thing. It's also geo tag in the sense like you know which coordinate belongs to north, south, what the heights and all those things. But then we are so used to this kind of a drawing culture. Anything which is not drawn as an elevation is not a information. But they could not distinguish between an information and a drawing and an afterwards. I'm sure. I seriously request all the students to follow this kind of works, and I'm sure there's a greater level of learning. Okay. Thank you very much. I may have to leave early today for my flight. See you soon.
Thank you, sir. It's been an honor to have you here. I now call Professor Meera Maligaonkar, our principal, to please felicitate Dr. Kailash Rao. Again, as a chairperson. I now call our last, but I'm sure a very interesting presentation for the panel, which is by Ishita Shah, founder Curating for Culture, and she'll present on the topic Community Engagement for Cultural Preservation. Ishita Shah is trained as an interior designer and an architectural historian. Over the last few years, she has been developing a community-based curatorial practice which focuses on cultural preservation and creative collaborations across individuals, families and organizations interested in building a culture for archiving in India and across South Asia. Her work is situated under the aegis of a self-founded collective, Curating for Culture. Ishita has worked with Biome Environmental Solutions Private Limited to curate their recent publication, Biome Diaries, Ecological Architecture from India, as well as collaborated with organizations like the National Center for Biological Sciences, INTAC Bangalore, Archila Ahmedabad, the Ministry of Culture, India, to curate and develop a wide range of public interpretation projects. Before this, she was an educator and the coordinator to the UNESCO Chair in Culture, Habitat and Sustainable Development at the Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology. She has also been the founding archivist and oral historian at SEPT Archives and worked with the Royal Institute of British Architects, UK, Insight Magazine, Spade India Research Cell and Design, Innovation and Craft Resource Center. Ishita is also a TEDx speaker, a Graham Foundation grant recipient, Coach CISA Fellow and a fellowship student at the Alternative Art School. I now invite Ishita to please start with the presentation.
Thank you, Uzma, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Rizvi, College of Architecture, for having me here. Till this gets started, I think good evening, good afternoon. Just a sleep check. Are you all with me over here? Yes. Oh, that's very good. That's very good. Right. How many of you like history? Honest raise hands. Nobody's taking marks. I'm giving you marks. How many of you don't like Honestly. Very good. I'm proud of you. How many of you are tired of architecture the way you see it? It's okay. It's okay. It will give you identity crisis, but you can still say that. How many of you are tired of architecture practice the way you are seeing it? Or not being able to understand it? And how many of you are able to understand what goes on in heritage conservation and preservation? Very few hands. So that sets the context of what I want to talk about. Presentation. So what I am going to talk about, as Uzma said, is community engagement for cultural preservation. And okay, are you all back with me here? Okay, I'm back with the presentation. Are you all here? Oh, good. Community. Why is it showing? I think the context is quite well set with Professor Chaya talking about being a more practicing profession rather than being a master. Professor Rao and Sukriti and Mr. Magan, all of them have sort of set the context of what's going on in cultural preservation or larger historical preservation. What I really want to talk about is how do we make ourselves a part of it, right? So when most of us say that we don't feel very excited about history, it's not about making you like history, it's about engaging ourselves into history. And this is not so much about architecture students or architects, it's about people or common public or audiences, right? And whom we now understand perhaps as a community. Now, all the work that I'm going to show you also belongs to a community. So before I start showing you all the work that I want to, I definitely would want you to take a second and credit or sort of recognize that any of the work that you all are building in any of the practices, the collective under which I practice is called Curating for Culture. Many organizations, many patrons, researchers, students have come together to be able to make the work that you're going to see. Now, a quick recap. As I said, this has already been talked about, but there are different kinds of heritage or cultural assets as we recognize, from physical to natural, tangible, intangible, so craft which becomes sort of combination of the two. But one of the most important ones which perhaps came up in the last presentation is documentary heritage. How many of you have heard this word even? Documentary heritage or documentary assets. It's very similar to what the previous presentation mentioned as archives. How many of you know what an archive is? Just a raise of hands, I don't need an answer. Right? Oh, that's again very good. When we think about histories as something which is integrated, which is told through so many forms of narratives, it is bringing us to this very important question. And you all are aware of these different situations, issues, movements. I'm not getting into each of these. We have enough contested histories in our country right now. कौन किस चीज़ को संभाल रहा है, कौन किस चीज़ को तोड़ेगा, कौन किस चीज़ को preserve करेगा, right? So there is a lot of erasure going on, much faster now in the name of development and progress. So existing processes of heritage conservation, preservation, I'm again not going to say them out loud. they're already there, you identify an asset, you study it, you work on preserving or conserving it. Sirs also mentioned about photogrammetry or other mediums in terms of assessing its condition. What is important is it all the way needs to come down to bureaucratic or policy level decisions. Something that again Sukriti or the UNESCO cell and the office have been talking about. I am adding a spoke in this wheel. I'm saying where does community sort of picture in this situation? And one of the approaches or one of the slippery slopes that we have consciously or unconsciously built in is to work with community in terms of data collection, in terms of getting information, getting to know things, and then we sort of forget them. This is something that Professor Deshpande said a little earlier in her session. What if they become co-authors or co-creators of the projects that we are proposing? And I'll sort of show you some examples of how we could do that. So we have been primarily working with two methods. One, which gets into archiving. Archiving, for those who don't know, is the science of preserving documents, materials, memorabilia, and all the documentation that we all as architectural colleges do would fall under this category of preserving it for longer times for scholarship, and as Sir mentioned, in a retrievable format or in a searchable format. So what we all do on Amazon and Flipkart is called a searchable database. So when you convert an archive or any old document into a searchable database, that is the extent of what an archiving process is. What you see on the left is Sept Archive, India's first architectural archive back in Ahmedabad, which now has over 20 archival collections. On the right is Patni Archives, a very regional project in Bhavnagar in Gujarat, where a family archive has led to archiving of histories from the region. I'm going to show you sort of three areas in which we have tried archiving, areas which we will all be able to associate with. So when I talk about cultural practices and narratives, we have worked with heritage towns like Hampi, Gulbarga, Bidar, mostly with student participants and workshop participants like yourself. And we have looked at the documentary heritage or the archives that exist, but we have also understood that the Western classical model of an archive perhaps won't work in India. We are too much of a living culture to be put into black and white or grey boxes. And that is where the need for indigenous narratives or storytelling as a way to understand and interpret history becomes very important. So the images on your left are from the project in Hampi. The images on your right are the project from Gulbarga. Similarly, practiced and lived histories. So since independence, in every field, but architecture per se, we hardly know more than 10, 20 important architectural histories, right? The numbers increasing now, but when we started Sept Archives back in 2013, the numbers were much lesser. And there are many important architects, planners, designers who have done very important, significant work in terms of nation building, in terms of city building, work which we might like or not like, but their journeys, their practice, their architecture, their architectural drawings and documentation is important to be preserved. So what you see here is an extension of the work we started at Sept Archives. The left is a digital archiving platform which now holds 21 oral histories of women practitioners from across India. These are women architects, planners, designers, conservators, environmentalists. And what you see on the right is a publication making process for bioarchitects from Bangalore, where again archiving was used as a tool to arrive at the information. And the most important aspect of the practice that we are looking at, and this is where people have sort of making the most amount of impact in terms of understanding history and making history more accessible, is archiving personal or family histories, right? So on the left again it's Patni Archive, but on the right are different other projects which we have been doing with people from across South Asia, where people are interested in preserving their family or their legacy histories or community histories. So now the idea of community is ever expansive and ever changing. The second method which we have been working with is curation. How many of you understand the word curation? Slightly, simply also, not slightly, but certainly. Okay, So we can get into that if you have more questions about curation, but I will also end with what I think about curation. For now, let's just understand that this is a way to bring communities together, right? Now, whether it's in the form of an exhibition, whether it's workshops, whether it is any kind of a performance or a live activity, you're bringing diverse community groups together because you want to make history accessible. Now, the same projects which I showed you earlier, we just see what curatorial practice does to them. So when we were talking about the Humpi project, you have so many archives about Humpi, but you still don't know, and especially I'm talking about archives which are not just about the building, it's also about the indigenous community. So storytelling allows us to sort of create a more fluid platform. It's not necessarily something as organized as Flipkart, where you will click on your filter boxes and you will get the information. It's something more like a garden walk on a digital platform, where you can go from one story to another, and through that you will get into the historical documents. Coming back to the conventional model of an archive, because perhaps this was important here, oral histories have not been made searchable in most of the projects yet. Oral histories are as expansive as 20 hours sometimes. How do you listen to 20 hours of somebody's life journey if you don't sort of slice and serve it? And that is why we converted the Women Architects project into a searchable database, which is where you can actually go through the filter list to be able to decide which story or which architect you want to listen to, or which two architect stories sort of intersects and you might want to write further about it. On the other hand, Bio Diaries, the publication, really tries to break the conventional form of an architectural publication in terms of curatorial practice. Now what you see on the left is the family archiving project which I just mentioned, which in a span of 3 years has already opened up doors for regional histories or community histories of Kathiawad, which is a subculture or a regional culture for South Gujarat. On the right is a public exhibition of many such personal histories which happened in Delhi and then happened in Bangalore, where you will constantly find people hesitant to open somebody's history and read it. A lot of them very intrigued by what might come up in this history. But what was most important in all of these projects is the sense of connection. So even when I'm thinking about Women Architects project, you would be utterly surprised. There were ex-women architects who didn't know about why women architect. And they are from the same time period. So this is the power or sort of a care or a strength that preservation brings to board. It can bring people together, something that we perhaps need a lot right now when we have become very intolerant of each other. It really does build in the sense of community, and that is a better representation of, as I keep saying, a small microscopic archive of a divan is now able to bring a whole city, Bhavnagar as a city or the regional history, together in one place through the recent exhibition that we made. So two last concluding thoughts. What am I sort of leaving you all to think about? Culture preservation needs community, but not community as deliverables or delivering just information to us, but actually as co-authors and co-participants, because that would assure longevity or sustainability of these projects. Otherwise, today you will preserve a certain set of histories or a monument. Tomorrow there will again be nobody to take care of it. In that process, both archiving and curation, as I said, I will explain later, they are built on the logic of care, because of which you start seeing community as an expandable model. So it's not just the binary of rural and urban. Even Rizvi is a community now, right? Rizvi College as a larger institution is a community. You also start understanding the importance of feeling represented. So imagine if your story is being put out in an exhibition in Bombay or in Delhi, and somebody else reads it and finds connections and parallels. And these connections really start mattering for somebody to care about history and culture. And more importantly, working with access as your ultimate goal, which means you allow more languages to seep in, you subvert or you break the colonial or the classical model. But more important than this logic of care is the ethics of care. So when you start working with communities, there is a slippery slope, as I keep warning, that you might appropriate their histories. You might sort of create a power dynamics which is unknowingly sort of set in. And these are very important aspects that you start learning to break in the process. They're not easily done, of course, that's why the subtitle of the presentation says it's not easy, it's easier said than done. But this process makes these projects continuous, or rather continued projects or working spaces. I think as Professor Rao also said, that you don't do conservation or preservation or deal with culture preservation for a one-time action or initiative, but you see them becoming a part of your lives. And perhaps that would change the attitude to culture preservation, where we all become a part of it, rather than, and somewhere where you can interpret, rather than having to accept history for what it is. Thank you so much for listening to me patiently.
Well, thank you, Ishita. That was right on time. And now, well, we have had 3 very diverse presentations talking about community participation, digital archiving, and digital tools for documentation. To indulge in such interesting case examples from the site, as well as the existing practices which are there, was very intriguing. I will now open the forum to questions from the audience. Do we have any questions? Yes.
कार्ड चेंज कर देता, हाँ, बैटरी भी दे दो, कार्ड बैटरी दोनों चेंज कर देता।
You said enhance communication.
Yeah.
Start living in them. I mean, I really mean it. I'm not kidding. I don't know if you all experienced what's happening upstairs at the second year exhibition. One is, it's obvious that architecture students would exhibit their work by recreating the space, right? But it's so subtly done to the extent that I think when 2 of us were visiting Professor Chaya and me, one of us noticed, one of us didn't. But it did leave an impression in terms of what the project or the exhibition is sort of trying to say eventually, right? So when I'm making that joke, or it sounds like a joke that will live in it, I don't think there is any other way to understand it. I mean, I can then speak for myself that
Thank you.
I would just like to add on to what Ishita has very beautifully pointed out, and I would second her completely in that sense. You'll have the best possible way to communicate with it and understand, grasp it effectively. So yeah.
So I have one question for Sukriti. So what we have been observing when we talk about culture, heritage, and now with the newer definitions coming in, there's a lot of resurgence of culture that is setting in, which is good in terms of bridging the gap between the communities, getting in a lot of tourism to the cities, specifically to a lot of historic cores. But at the same time, we also see there's a slight disbalance where the tourism sort of disbalances the entire idea of community occupying those spaces, and gentrification being one of the key propositions that is coming in. So what is that so in your project that you're doing in Bhopal, how did you sort of manage that, or was there any framework that was placed with certain variables that if anything goes beyond this variable we would like to contain it?
So balance is the key to each and everything around, right? You would readily understand, आप gentrification की बात कर रहे हैं, you would readily understand where it is to a limit, to a viable amount, where it is not. And if at all, when we, I think Kailash sir also mentioned about how economy is not just limited to a certain set of shops or people who are contributing and benefiting by it. It is much more than that, right? So it will vary from city to city, right? Bhopal ke case mein we did not find it too much for that matter. There are many cases where it is too much, so to say. That depends a lot on the local government. How much are we able to cater to it? There can be provisions made at the site itself. If at all not, जो जनता वहाँ पे जहाँ उससे रोजी रोटी कमा रही है उसको हटा देना तो is not the solution, right? So you have to effectively cater to the remaining set of people also elsewhere in some other forms also, so that that whole equation and that whole balance does not get resolved. Right?
Thank you.
Okay, so I have a question for each one of you. First, to start with Nishika, when we were talking about women architects archiving the digital moving ahead with digital archiving, talking about community association and preservation. So how easy or difficult was it to actually go on site and try to ease the community in terms of stakeholder participation or intervention, or to make them understand? Because here when we are talking on any platform, it's very easy for us, as audience to absorb all the learnings which were there from site. But as practitioners and as in when you're working on the research project, there must be a lot of challenges that you would be facing on the site. That as students also when we are going for documentation or any other exercise, there are certain pre-notions or certain assumptions that we have to have before sensitizing each one of us to actually deal with culture, heritage, talking about how this will be aided or how this will actually enhance in future pedagogy and other things. So how do you work on that?
I think it's a good question because I end up taking courses on ethnography. I think what I tell the students is a very safe answer here, or the correct answer, is that going on field as if you know nothing, as if you are this 3-year-old or a 5-year-old child, how much ever old you might be, doesn't matter. Going in as clean slate as possible works very well in terms of avoiding any of these preempted challenges. And what I mean over here is that sometimes our own knowledge or our own assumption कि हमें इतना तो पता है comes in our way more than what we don't know on site, right? Very lived experiences of this have been, when even simply just communicating with the communities, whether it's in Hampi or in Gulbarga, sometimes you would find yourselves, or even you would find the students who are doing it for the first time, fumbling for words, right? Because you're so used to thinking in the urban western education system that right now all that I'm saying, उसको भी मुझे अभी के अभी हिंदी में बोलना है, गुजराती में बोलना मुझसे नहीं होगा, right? And that is why you become very humble, you become very simple. मुझे आपसे आपकी जिंदगी के बारे में बात करनी, कोई jargon नहीं. आप हम्पी के बाजू में रहते हो, उससे आपकी जिंदगी में क्या changes what they understand. So luckily code mixing as a language is working everywhere. Nobody is looking for parivartan as a word. Now everybody understands. But the simplicity information is what I'm hinting at. The moment you're able to do that, कि हमें हम्पी के बारे में इतने सालों में क्या changes हुए वो समझ लें, and then goes on the conversation very fluidly, right? Apart from that, or rather counter to that, even with women architects, when we constantly interviewed, we realized that they thought that gender was supposed to be an issue in the conversation. And then they would clarify, but I didn't face any issues because of gender. But we never said it. It is the context of the project which made them think that they always had to say that gender is a problem in architecture. So we have to keep clarifying that, forget what the project intent is. It's your oral history. You say it as naturally, neutrally, or it can be neutral, but as naturally and as lived as it is. And from there, you sort of work out the challenges that you might face. Having said that, of course, there can be very obvious or unavoidable challenges in terms of ultimately who we are, in terms of the way we have been brought up and the way we might meet communities. Again, it doesn't matter whether it's in the regional context or in the urban context. There, I think, Usma, I've realized that conversations are again the key. That you become more and more empathetic. You understand, you communicate if you don't like something, they communicate to you कि आप ऐसा करोगे तो हमारे लोगों को नहीं पसंद आएगा, and that mutual respect for each other sort of needs to seep in, and I think that's something that comes over practice and time. We have also made our mistakes and we've learned.
Thank you, Ashita. I think that was really incredible in terms of all the detailed assessment and actually talking about what how we can sensitize ourselves perhaps, and of course it comes to practice that when you go into the field and when you talk to people or you have a lot of exercises that you learn with them. Well, of course, thank you. So my next question is to you, sir. And when we were discussing Usmania residency, British residency in Hyderabad, that was I think only the Darbar one, but eventually it must have taken a lot of time for you to assess, for you to reflect upon it and go with all the methodology and assessment of how to execute it on site, that all the shots, different shots, and how you stitch together. So this is perhaps a very small exercise, but to see it on a larger scale, that the whole as the drawing is, how we go ahead with the smaller scale of the drawing is. It's really interesting to see how all these things are there on details, drawings, detail assessments. So how can we, as learners from the field of culture and heritage, really take into accordance with the digital AI tools innovations? Because to actually include it in pedagogy is quite difficult all at once. And here we struggle only to equip ourselves and the students with the basic tools and assessments. So how is it really possible to introduce these things? Like as you said, that as we are going ahead, we need to equip ourselves the latest advancement tools and technologies. So how do we really, go at space with these things, but at the same time we have to also equip ourselves with the, basics of hand drafting perhaps, or the basic tools that we also learned along.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to pick from there, the answer, the word empathy, whether it is with humans or with the building. At the end of the day, if we are not able to achieve a purpose, if we are not able to read the thing in front of us, in terms of space, and able to give back to a point that the purpose is getting achieved. Like every time I would feel if a client or a conservation architect who I'm working for, if they say no, this is not good, then that's something, it is not good. Then probably the question is that is the data not compelling enough? Let me try a little more. So that is the whole standpoint from which everything has to be done. In terms of embracing the digital technology, I think one point is we always look at it as something alien. 20 years before digital photography, maybe that assumption is still valid, but now I don't think it is valid anymore. To a point where all the master's conservation course has a photogrammetry or digital documentation as part of their syllabus, and they do come out of it without doing it. A lot of PhD candidates have approached me because they have photogrammetry they do not have any idea about it. They know it theoretically, but then it was from my in 2015 when I used to read about photogrammetry, how can two photographs become equal? But only I was able to go through it and understand it to a point where there are, I would say, three things. One is a camera that most of us have. Maybe with the phone camera, we may not be able to do an entire building. We can certainly do a couple of spaces. There is no question on that. The second thing is the software. The software which we use, like even what shows meta sheets, the subsidized versions are there for the individual organizations. The third is actually the purpose of the effort for us. I think, however, we say that photogrammetry might be easier than to parallel documentation. Actually, photogrammetry is equally physically strenuous. In another way, I won't say it is above or below the handcrafted, but in another way, photogrammetry makes you walk around the site as many different types, as many times that you require to cover the entire surface. So you don't get that understanding over there. In another level, in terms of the ecosystem to be building up, the firms and the colleges have to come in to look at it as an inclusive process. One is empathy, the other one is inclusion. Inclusion in understanding that when we take the photogrammetry, doesn't mean that we leave out handcrafted. Because every laser scanning data is incomplete without photogrammetry. Every photogrammetry data is incomplete without hand measurements. So it is always an inclusive thing. One thing that I wanted to say, because obviously Kailash will be working on the LiDAR part. For me, I was looking at the tool at every point I looked at if this tool is it for all? Because a lot of them when we talk about architecture, it is actually the elitist best in their kind of business. We are not talking about the person who is. We are always talking about the person who is. So with that point, I would also say that every camera can produce data with a decent amount of understanding of imaging. It is possible to produce information. That data becomes information, that becomes knowledge, and it possibly becomes part of our research.
Thank you, sir. Actually, that was actually interesting. And in terms of, because you're an architect and then you comfortably found a niche through photography and combining through and navigating your way into cultural heritage. And perhaps there's a lot more that we can probably discuss later or engage our conversation talking about the future possibilities as a topic of the conference is reflections of the future. So my last question for our first speaker, Sukriti, is about community participation and also the role of CSR, because that is something that you've been working with. Surprisingly, that was not part of the presentation, but all in all, because you have a lot of experience with how CSRs and monetization and then association with the state, which is very important, that is the state of execution in tangible built heritage. So how are these different umbrellas and things when we are actually visiting a site or talking about user experience and other things that we are able to feel but not really see the entire process and learn about? How do you, any notes or any examples that you like to connect about?
So I think I consistently kept this stance of mine where you have to take charge of things in your own hands, and that's the crux of it. With respect, so what did I say? Culture is of the people, for the people, and by the people. It's something that we create for ourselves and for the people, for the upcoming generations. In order to be able to preserve it, community engagement, community sensitization, and I think we should have consistently kept on repeating this particular thing. It is very important. And corporate social responsibility, the CSR term, if you look at it, it means it focuses on social responsibility, something that you have to give back to the society, like culture does, right? And for agencies to take up CSR, they'll have to understand the aspect of them being socially responsible. And ironically, that is not the case. CSR cases in the system, there are many enterprises that happen to work. They have to dedicatedly work on the 2% of the profits that they make towards CSR. They ironically don't end up utilizing them effectively that they should. CSR के नाम पे people tend to अपने हाथ झाड़ लेते हैं एंड में चाहते हुए कि हाँ ये करना है let's let it be जितना है उसको अलग अलग sections में डाल दो but critically think करके actually में क्या करना है कोई नहीं सोचता. So that is where the responsibility of you, of us as professionals come into picture. That is why I kept saying you have to...
Sorry to interrupt, but is there a lot to talk about that section or nothing to talk about?
It is a lot to talk about. But yeah, you have to take charge, you have to understand it, you have to go and meet people or the authorities aware about the whole situation because they are waiting for you to come. Let me tell you this. They are. And they want to work on it, it's just that there is this lack of professionals who understand it properly. So
thank you very much. Thank you, Ishita. Thank you, Maria sir. I hope I pronounced it correctly this time. Thank you, Sukriti, for such an interesting panel. And I also thank Dr. Kailash Rao, the chairperson for the panel Cultural Heritage. I now invite Assistant Professor Saili Gazavi and Professor Vindra Bokle for felicitating our presenters for the session.
क्या बोल रहे? हाइट
Hello everyone. So we are starting again in 5 minutes for our last session for the day. That is online, and we'll be starting it off in a while. So you can take a 5-minute break if you want, but please do not leave the premises or the auditorium. Yeah, please. Thank you.
एक प्रोग्राम और है इसमें
Okay, attendance will be taken at 5:50 by the respective CRs. Attendance for the day will be taken at